In India, one mafia boss won elections while in prison. In Sicily, another mafia boss orchestrated the murder of a 13-year-old boy, dissolving him in acid. These may sound unbelievable, but that's only a fraction of the kind of crazy things mafia bosses do behind bars. We've compiled a list of some of the most shocking and audacious experiences these kingpins have had while in prison, and the first on the list today is Matteo Messina Denaro. Matteo Messina Denaro was known as Diabolic. Denaro wasn't just born into the mafia, he was destined to rule it. His father was a powerful local boss, so he had early exposure to the workings of the Sicilian mafia. By the 1980s, he had become a key figure in the Sicilian mafia, involved in extortion, drug trafficking, and numerous murders. Several attempts to arrest him ended in failure, with Denaro always managing to stay one step ahead of the authorities. In the end, it was Denaro's own deteriorating health that led to his downfall. On January 16, 2023, after nearly 30 years on the run, Denaro was arrested in Palermo, Sicily, in a private clinic where he was undergoing treatment for colon cancer under the name Andrea Bonafede. Even behind bars, Denaro's influence didn't wane. From his prison cell, he continued to wield considerable control over the mafia and ensured that the Cosa Nostra's operations carried on without interruption. Though under constant surveillance, he was reportedly allowed certain luxuries that set him apart from the average inmate. He had access to private visits, high-quality food, and other privileges. Denaro's health had been declining steadily since his arrest as he battled cancer. Despite receiving treatment, the disease eventually overwhelmed him. In his final days, he was a shadow of his former self, frail, weakened, and confined to a hospital bed. Denaro's life came to an end on September 25, 2023. However, not every mafia boss enjoyed the privileges in prison that Denaro enjoyed. One such mafia boss who had a hard time in prison was Francesco Madonia. Francesco Madonia was the mafia boss of the San Lorenzo Pallavicino area in Palermo. He was involved in several bloody events in the 1980s and was responsible either directly or indirectly for the murder of several people. He was also involved in a failed bomb attack against anti-mafia judge Giovanni Falcone. Francesco Madonia was convicted for ordering the murder of Libero Grassi, a Palermo businessman who boldly refused to pay protection money, known as the Pizzo, in 1991. Since the order was carried out by his own son, Salvatore Salvino Madonia, they were both sentenced to life imprisonment on November 14, 1992. In prison, Madonia's life took a dark turn as he was imprisoned under the harsh conditions of Italy's 41 bis regime. The 41 bis regime was a strict prison protocol designed to isolate mafia bosses from their networks. The prison was also known as carcere duro, which means hard prison regime. While in prison, Madonia experienced intense isolation and strict communication restrictions. Measures were taken to completely cut him off from his former criminal associates. These measures included prohibitions on using the telephone, associating or corresponding with other inmates, meeting with third parties, receiving or sending money beyond a certain limit, and receiving parcels other than linen. He was barred from participating in cultural, recreational, or sporting activities, voting or standing in elections for prisoner representatives, and engaging in arts and crafts. Visits from family were restricted to once a month, with communication allowed only via intercom through thick glass. It was impossible for him to continue operating from prison. Madonia's health deteriorated over the years, and in 2007, at the age of 82, he died in prison. Madonia was not the only mafia boss who was imprisoned under the harsh conditions of the 41 bis regime. There was also Bernardo Provenzano. Bernardo Provenzano, a notorious Sicilian mafia boss, earned the nickname Bernie the Tractor for his ruthless efficiency in plowing people down. Despite his violent reputation, Provenzano was known for his deep religious beliefs and strict adherence to a code of secrecy. He never used phones to communicate, relying instead on handwritten notes or pizzini to relay orders and give advice. Provenzano had been a fugitive since 1963, evading capture for over 4 decades before finally being arrested in 2006 near Corleone, Sicily. Once in custody, Provenzano was also subjected to the strict 41 bis prison regime. Despite these harsh conditions, he attempted to continue his communication through smuggled pizzini, but prison officials largely aborted these efforts. Provenzano's time in prison was marked by steady isolation, harsh conditions, and a decline in his health. He nearly ran crazy in prison, and he reportedly made several suicide attempts. He spent his final years in frail condition, and in 2016, he died. Of all the mafia bosses that ended up under the 41 bis prison regime, Kosimo Daro probably suffered the most. Kosimo Daro Cosimo Daro was an Italian camarista who served as the acting boss of the Daro clan in Naples. He was said to be one of the most cold-hearted bosses in the Camorra Mafia organization. Known for his flamboyant style and love of designer clothing, he was nicknamed the Designer Don. He was a central player in the bloody power struggles that defined the Italian Mafia during the early 2000s. As the eldest son of clan leader Paolo Daro, Cosimo took control of the family's criminal empire, driving it into a brutal gang war known as the Scampia feud. His ruthless leadership style led to widespread violence and a series of murders. In 2005, after years of evading the law, Cosimo was arrested in Scampia, and in 2008, he received a 15-year prison sentence. Shortly after, he received 3 life sentences and was detained under the 41 bis solitary confinement regime in Sardinia. Cosimo Daro died alone in 2022 at the young age of 48, desperate and driven to madness within the confines of a prison. He had the opportunity to seek redemption but chose not to, refusing to be the first in his family to take that path. In the end, he felt betrayed by everyone and recognized that he had in turn betrayed everything he once stood for. The situation surrounding his death was very suspicious, and a manslaughter investigation was immediately launched. While Cosimo Daro died alone in prison, another mafia boss, Pablo Escobar, lived a very luxurious life in prison, and he definitely did not live the luxurious life alone. Pablo Escobar, born on December 1, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, Escobar grew up in a poor family but had grand ambitions from a young age. His journey into the underworld began with petty crimes such as selling contraband cigarettes and forging lottery tickets. Escobar founded the Medellin cartel, which controlled about 80% of the global cocaine market. He was earning millions of dollars a day, making him one of the richest men in the world. Escobar used his wealth to build a vast network of corruption and violence, bribing officials and eliminating rivals. Escobar was on the run for a long time with his family. However, in 1991, Escobar struck a deal with the Colombian government. He agreed to surrender in exchange for lenient treatment. His incarceration at La Catedral was more of a luxurious retreat than a punishment. Escobar's prison, which he personally designed and built, had amenities you won't find in a typical prison. The facility had a jacuzzi, soccer field, bar, waterfall, and hilltop with views of the city that Escobar once ruled. In prison, Escobar continued to live like a king, surrounded by his most trusted men who served as both his guards and companions. He hosted lavish parties, entertained high-profile guests, and even arranged for women to be brought in. The prison also had a full staff of cooks and maids, ensuring that Escobar's every need was met. Escobar didn't just run his criminal empire from within the prison, he expanded it. This continued until 1992, when the Colombian government, under increasing pressure, realized that Escobar's incarceration was a farce. They attempted to transfer him to a more secure facility, but Escobar escaped, disappearing into the mountains. He was finally arrested on December 2, 1993, when Colombian forces tracked him down to a hideout in Medellin. Escobar was shot and killed in a rooftop chase. Unlike Pablo, Francesco Malardo didn't exactly get a taste of luxury life behind bars. Francesco Malardo was one of Italy's 30 most dangerous fugitives and was responsible for the murder of over a dozen people. Known for his slippery nature, Malardo pulled off not one but 2 daring escapes from custody while under hospital care. These weren't your typical prison breaks. They were calculated, almost cinematic in execution, highlighting just how resourceful and determined he was to avoid prison bars. He was eventually arrested after a car chase that left 2 policemen injured. Following his arrest, Malardo was placed under the stringent 41 bis regime in prison, a special security measure reserved for the most dangerous mafia bosses. Under 41 bis, Malardo's life has been a stark contrast to his previous powerful position, with severe restrictions on his communication and activities. The 41 bis regime in prison was probably enough to keep Francesco Malardo from society for life, but this harsh prison regime had no effect on Salvatore Reena, who, even while in prison, ordered the murder of a 13-year-old boy. Salvatore Reena, or as he was known, Toto, was the boss of bosses in the Sicilian Mafia. Born on November 16, 1930, Reena earned a reputation that matched his nickname, The Beast, and honestly, he lived up to it with a ruthless streak that peaked in the early 90s.
Reena ha rappresentato per molti noi siciliani che abbiamo operato nel mondo dell'informazione, ma non solo, anche la gente comune, il massimo di di malvagità che riesce a produrre l'uomo.
You see, Reena led a brutal campaign that took down anyone who stood in his way. He was hell-bent on taking out the older mafia chiefs who played the game differently. Unlike these traditional mafia chiefs, Reena didn't just go after rivals. He broke all the rules and targeted women, children, and even innocent bystanders. But Reena's brutality wasn't limited to his colleagues in the mafia. He also went after high-profile anti-mafia prosecutors like Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. Reena's violence led to a massive crackdown by the authorities, and he was on the run from the late 1960s, and eventually he was captured. Reena was locked up in a maximum security prison in Parma, where he had almost no contact with the outside world. The idea was to prevent him from running his mafia empire from behind bars, and they really clamped down on him. Over $125 million in assets were seized, and even his massive mansion was seized from him and later turned into a police station. Can you imagine that? In total, Reena was slapped with 26 life sentences and was in solitary confinement, cut off from everything. But even in prison, his brutality didn't stop. Reena ordered the murder of a 13-year-old boy just to keep his father from talking to the police, and his associates weren't any better. They kept setting off bombings in Rome, Milan, and Florence that killed lots of people. Reena was under the strict Article 41 Bia's prison regime, which meant tight security and almost no visits from his family, and this probably led to his bad health conditions in the later parts of his life on Earth. In mid-March 2003, Reena underwent surgery for heart problems, and he was admitted to the hospital for a heart attack in the same year. In September of that year, he was hospitalized again for heart problems. In 2006, he was transferred to the Opera prison in Milan, and in March 2014, he was hospitalized again. But all these troubles with his heart weren't enough to soften Reena's heart and ways. In August 2014, newspapers reported that Reena was threatening Luigi Ciotti, an Italian Catholic priest involved in the fight against illegality and organized crime. Even when he was dying, his request for house arrest was denied because the families of his victims protested. Reena never showed any remorse. He was caught on a wiretap saying he had no regrets and would never be broken, even if they gave him 3,000 years in jail. And honestly, he stayed true to his word, never breaking his silence until the end. Next on the list is Nicodemus Scarfo. Nicodemus Scarfo, who took on the name Little Nicky, was born on March 8, 1929 in Brooklyn to Italian immigrant parents. Scarfo's early life wasn't exactly glamorous. When he was 12, his family moved to South Philly, and after high school he tried his hand at boxing, but after failing to make it big in the ring, he turned to a different kind of fight, the criminal underworld. Scarfo started working with his uncle, Nicky Buck, a soldier in the Philly mob. By 1954, he was officially inducted into the Philadelphia crime family. Now, Scarfo wasn't exactly a charming young man. Like many other mafia bosses, he was more arrogant and stubborn. This attitude even led to some tension within the family when he refused to marry the daughter of a consigliere, leaving the family a bit embarrassed. In the 70s, Scarfo was sent to Atlantic City to oversee operations just as gambling was legalized. This turned out to be a goldmine for him. He used his cement contracting company, Scarf Inc., to intimidate businesses into buying from him. Scarfo didn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who crossed him. In 1978, he was involved in the murder of Judge Edwin Helfand, and the following year he ordered the killing of an associate who badmouthed his company. Scarfo's rise to power was marked by violence and intimidation, turning Atlantic City into his own personal empire. When Little Nicky was sentenced to 55 years in prison on murder and racketeering charges in May 1989, he barely flinched. Just 2 weeks before, he'd already been handed a life sentence for the 1985 murder of bookmaker Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso. For Scarfo, who had ruled the Philadelphia South Jersey Mafia with an iron fist, prison was where his reign ended. His life behind bars wasn't glamorous, and it ultimately came to a close on Friday, January 13th, when he passed away from cancer at the Federal Medical Center in North Carolina. He was 87. Most mafia bosses keep themselves away from the spotlight in politics, but this mafia boss wanted to be in it, and prison wasn't going to stop him from taking the shine. He's no other but Papu Kalani. Papu Kalani started his journey in Ulhasnagar, Maharashtra, where he was born, around 1951. He came from a wealthy family with deep political connections. His uncle, Dunachan Kalani, was a local Congress leader, and the family owned several distilleries and hotels. Ulhasnagar, during the 1970s, was a bustling town known for its illegal businesses and forgeries, and it wasn't long before protection became a lucrative business. Kalani's family was heavily involved in these activities, with his uncle, Kimat Kalani, overseeing a gang. Their political rivals had their own gang, gangs, all with connections to the notorious Dawood Ibrahim. In this environment, Papu Kalani emerged as a leader of an organized crime syndicate in the 1980s. He transitioned smoothly into politics, becoming the president of the Ulhasnagar Municipal Council in 1986. By 1990, he was elected to the Maharashtra Vidhan Sabha as an Indian National Congress candidate from the Ulhasnagar constituency. What's striking is that even while he was in jail on murder charges, Kalani managed to win 2 elections during the period from 1992 to 2001. He was re-elected in 2004 as a member of the Republican Party of India. Despite his political successes, Kalani's criminal record is long and dark. In December 2013, Kalani was sentenced to life imprisonment for a 23-year-old murder case involving Ghanshyam Bhatija. Ghanshyam's brother, Inder Bhatija, who witnessed the murder, was also killed in 1999, even though he had police protection. It is hard to talk about mafia bosses without mentioning Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman El Chapo, the Mexican drug lord who once ran the Sinaloa cartel, went from living the high life to being locked away in one of the most secure prisons in the world. After his dramatic capture and extradition to the United States, El Chapo found himself in the United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility, otherwise known as ADX Florence in Colorado, a prison designed to keep the worst of the worst locked up tight. But this wasn't the first time El Chapo was imprisoned, nor was it the first time he faced the impossible challenge of confinement. In fact, he's infamous for 2 audacious prison escapes that kept authorities on their toes. The first was in 2001 when he slipped out of a maximum security Mexican prison by hiding in a laundry cart. This allowed him to stay on the run for over a decade before he was finally recaptured in 2014. But even then, the world wasn't ready for what would happen next. In 2015, El Chapo staged a daring escape from yet another maximum security prison, this time via a mile-long tunnel that led straight to his cell. Now, however, locked away in ADX Florence, El Chapo spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement in a tiny cell with a concrete bed, stool, and a small steel toilet. There's no window to the outside world, just a small slit in the wall to let in some light. It's nothing close to the luxurious lifestyle he was accustomed to. Under constant surveillance, every movement El Chapo makes is closely monitored. His daily hour of exercise is spent alone in a concrete pit that's more like a cage than a yard. Communication with the outside world is nearly non-existent. He's allowed a few phone calls and visits, but they're heavily monitored. His legal team has claimed that he's losing his mind due to the extreme isolation. El Chapo himself has complained of psychological torment and has appealed for more humane conditions. Whether these claims are genuine or simply part of a legal strategy, it's clear that his life in ADX Florence is worlds away from his past, and chances for any potential future escapes are bleak. Next we have James J. Marcello. James J. Marcello, known as Little Jimmy, is one of the most feared bosses in Chicago's outfit. He was convicted in the Family Secrets trial, a landmark case that exposed the dark secrets of the Chicago outfit. Marcello was sentenced to life in prison and is currently serving his sentence at the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado. Once behind bars, Marcello's life changed drastically. He went from living large to a life of strict routines and isolation. Gone are the days of commanding fear and respect. In prison, he's just another inmate. He was sent to a high-security federal prison where the conditions are tough and the company is far from friendly. Despite his mob boss status, he doesn't receive any special treatment. The prison routine is monotonous, with limited contact with the outside world. Marcello's legal team has made several appeals to be transferred to another prison, but he still spends his days in a small cell, surrounded by concrete walls, with little to do but reflect on the life he once led. While Marcello lived a life detached from mafia activities and administration in prison, the prison was not enough to stop another mafia boss from running his syndicate. This boss is none other than Lucky Luciano. Lucky. Luciano, the man credited with organizing the modern American mafia, found himself in prison in 1936 after being convicted of running a prostitution ring. He was sentenced to around 30 years and was sent to Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. Even while behind bars, Luciano still managed to retain some of his influence. He continued to run his mafia family from prison and gave orders through the acting boss of the mafia, Genovesi. Even when Genovesi fled to Naples to avoid an impending murder indictment, Luciano appointed another boss who continued to carry out his orders. While in Clinton Correctional Prison, Luciano lived the life of a king, and the government even allowed one of his associates, Betillo, to prepare special dishes for him in a special kitchen. But that was not all. Luciano also used his influence to help get materials needed to build a church in prison, and this church became famous as one of the only freestanding churches in the New York State correctional system till date. During World War II, the U.S. government, needing to secure the New York docks from potential sabotage, turned to Luciano. Despite his circumstances, he was able to to broker an arrangement with the Mafia to help protect the ports. Thanks to his cooperation, his sentence was reduced, and after serving about 10 years, Luciano was released from prison in 1946. However, part of the deal was that he had to leave the United States. He was deported to Italy, where he spent the rest of his life. Even in exile, Luciano remained a significant figure in the Mafia world, though his power wasn't quite what it had been before his conviction. Luciano, the renowned Mafia boss, made it to prison, but it wasn't only him. His acting Mafia boss, Genovesi, who ran away to escape a murder indictment, also finally landed in prison. Vito Genovesi, the influential boss of the Genovesi crime family, had quite an eventful time behind bars. He denied ever being connected with the Mafia at any time.
Well, sir, have you ever been connected with the Mafia at any time? Never.
After being convicted in 1959 for drug trafficking, he was sent to prison, and that's where his story really took a turn. Genovesi wasn't exactly enjoying prison life. His health started to decline, and he dealt with serious issues like diabetes and a stroke in 1962. Despite his health problems, he tried to stay involved in his criminal empire from his hospital bed, and even though he was physically restricted, he tried to maintain control through coded messages and intermediaries. By the time he passed away in 1969, Genovesi had become a legendary figure known for his attempts to stay involved in his empire despite his declining health. And although he is now dead, the Genovesi crime family is still operating today in New York City. And finally, on today's list, we have Servando Gomez Martinez. Servando Gomez Martinez, better known as La Tuta, was the head of the Knights Templar cartel. This group has carried out thousands of gruesome murders against people who flouted their orders. Despite being on the run, La Tuta continued to make occasional public appearances where he handed out money to women and children, granting him celebrity status amongst his people. On February 27, 2015, La Tuta was arrested by the Mexican police. They spotted him in a cave near Morelia after his girlfriend ordered a chocolate cake for his 49th birthday. After his arrest in 2015, La Tuta's life behind bars was anything but ordinary, but even in prison, he managed to keep a tight grip on his criminal empire using coded messages and intermediaries. Things took a dramatic turn when, in 2017, La Tuta was transferred to the infamous El Altiplano prison, which was the same prison where Joaquin El Chapo Guzman made his famous escape in 2015. However, this time security was on high alert. While in that prison, he faked a heart attack to facilitate his escape, but the authorities didn't fall for it. Unfortunately, even though that heart attack was staged, La Tuta's health had truly started to deteriorate. Now he continues to battle with a range of health problems that require frequent medical attention. If you found this video interesting, click on any of the cards on the screen for more interesting videos.